that's done. What do you want to do now? Oh, there's nothing else to do. I guess I'll talk to you when that Mario game comes out. This seems familiar.
I already have you. You are my bitch. You bought the amiibos. You bought the collector's edition. I do not owe you anything. You are my bitch. You are my bitch. You are my little bitch.
Baasvik, basic reviews. Baasvik, basic reviews. Baasvik, basic reviews. Video games. He's not gonna cry. He's not gonna bitch or whine. He's Baasvik and he's gonna review.
2 months ago, I went out on a console launch night for the first time ever. I showed up 4 hours early to my local Meijer to buy a Nintendo Switch. I could have waited until 12 a.m. and still have gotten a console, but I was desperate to get my hands on Nintendo's weird new device. Just 2 months earlier, when Nintendo was showing off the Switch at a press conference for the first time, I decided I wouldn't buy a Switch, not right now at least, because there were no games available in a sparse 2017 lineup, to say the least. But then, near launch day, the reviews started floating in one by one, and they were all in agreement. Zelda Breath of the Wild was one of the greatest games ever made. Well, being the consummate journalist that I am, I had to see it for myself. And for a month and a half, as I trudged my way through a second tax season and a job search, I played pretty much nothing but Zelda. Most of my limited free time went to Zelda, and I really enjoyed myself. And by the end of the process, I knew one definitive thing: the critics were fucking dead wrong. Okay, I understand that reviews are subjective. Mine definitely are, and that's okay. I think it's totally fine that a bunch of idiots gave this game a 10. I would say Zelda is one of the better games I've played in the past few years, and although it pales in comparison to some of the masterpieces I've had the pleasure of experiencing, it's still a good game. But it's deeply flawed, often boring, and made some really confusing gameplay decisions that were just lackluster. Saying anybody shouldn't have given this a game a 10 would be wrong. They may have had a 10 of a time with it, and I suppose the issues I had may have not bothered them much, but they sure as hell keep the game from being some kind of masterpiece. So let's start with the quick positives, most of which you already know, and then I'll lobby some of my critiques. Breath of the Wild captures some of the greatest elements of video games and wraps them pretty well into a singular package. It does adventure maybe as well as any video game I can remember outside of the Fallout games. And the reason I would put a Fallout ahead of Breath of the Wild in terms of adventure is because Fallout's rewards for exploration are often better. Specifically in Fallout 3 in New Vegas, you can not only find some amazing gear through exploration, but also some incredible storylines. The storylines have less of an impact in Breath of the Wild, but the game makes up for it in terms of the actual act of exploring. You can climb mountains, explore seasides, go pretty much anywhere, and have a fantastic freedom of movement to get there. Maybe in no other video game is it so true that what you see in the distance is something you can reach. There are often problems with what's there when you reach the spot, but getting there is quite magical. When what you find is good, Breath of the Wild can be incredibly magical and satisfying. Coupled with the adventure is a great hot, cold weather system that forces you to switch gear to use potions to survive certain conditions, and a fascinating weapon durability system that I really enjoyed. Essentially, weapons break, so you have to find new ones, but it makes you adjust to a wide variety of weapons as well. It's a good system and is super fun to use. My only complaint about it is that they could have streamlined some of the menus so that it would be easier to drop bows and shields. And finally, one of the other great things is the size of the game. There's plenty to do here, and even though it isn't all amazing content, it's easy to get caught up in a completionist mindset while playing Breath of the Wild. It can be a very relaxing experience, and some mindless treasure hunting never hurt anybody. And Breath of the Wild is really just an incredible time sink between Korok seeds, shrines, spirit orbs, different weapons, mini bosses, side quests. There's a ton to do, and it reminds me of kind of your modern open world games like Skyrim, or even the Ubisoft titles that just give you so much to do. The difference is Breath of the Wild isn't necessarily filling up a map and telling you to go explore the map. It kind of wants you to adventure on your own and figure out what deserves to be done, you know, based on your own preferences and what you desire out of the game. And it does that exceptionally well, so I really appreciated that element. Hi, buddy. I'm reviewing something. However, beyond that, Zelda is honestly a mess in many ways. Playing off the adventure elements that I think are so strong, I would argue that the end result of the adventure is almost always underwhelming. The best moment I had was finding the Lost Woods that is permeating throughout so many Zelda games. At the end lays something very special, which I won't spoil, that had a profound effect on the game for me and likely many others. However, most of what you find is generally useless or just not worth the time of the adventure. I would categorize what you find as one of three things: a shrine, a fairy fountain, or a mini-boss. That may be oversimplification, but considering the equipment degradation, finding weapons never feels that rewarding. But the shrines are the most disappointing discoveries in the game. They vary wildly, offer little challenge or enjoyment, and give a somewhat paltry reward. Most of the shrines are barely even puzzles. On occasion, they're just a room with an enemy of varying difficulty. But the enemies are generally the same outside of how many weapons they're holding. And sometimes the shrine literally has nothing. No puzzle, no enemy, just the reward, which honestly feels lazy and shows a lack of confidence in the design of the shrines. And I felt like the entire time that the shrines lacked much of the ingenuity that I love and look for in Zelda games. It actually, in a way, feels to a point where it's not fair compared to other Zelda games because it's very different in design. In most Zelda games, you're picking up items as you go that unlock other areas, and those other areas usually lead you to temples. And once you get to the temple, you are submitted to a series of puzzles, and those puzzles are usually fantastic. And then you get a very design and bosses and boss battles that are usually more puzzle focused than they are combat focused. And so Breath of the Wild doesn't exactly feel much like a traditional Zelda game. It's more of an evolution of open world games, but in a way that Zelda formula is a lot of what makes Zelda so good. And I'm not a huge Zelda fanboy, but to me, you know, that formula is pretty important, although some people would argue it was starting to feel trite. But honestly, I probably would have rather played a game like Skyward Sword or Link Between Worlds over Breath of the Wild by the time I was finished. I'm not a fanboy. That design problem seeps into the temples as well. The divine beasts, which act as one of the main quest lines of the game, serve as the temples. There are a total of 4 divine beasts, each of which is a large puzzle in and of itself. You have to manipulate the divine beasts to activate terminals, which then activate a main terminal. At the main terminal, you face the boss of the temple. Each boss is inhabited by the spirit of Ganon and defeated an ally of Link's. Unfortunately, the divine beast puzzles are really simple. They don't take very long to figure out, and the puzzles are missing the magical moments that define the series. That same sentiment sadly describes the bosses for me as well. They just don't vary enough in artistic design or combat design to impress. They're fun and a good way to end the divine beasts, but they aren't incredibly interesting. They aren't quite the puzzle-style bosses that I love from Zelda games, but they aren't that bad. They're okay, and I guess they're how I would have ended a Zelda temple. I just maybe would have taken more time to make them more interesting and make the fights feel dynamic and enjoyable. Personally, I just think where Zelda makes its money for me, where it really separates itself from other games, is that the temples that you get to in Zelda games are just, they're some of the best design in video games. Just every temple I've ever played, outside of maybe, a water temple here and there, is just so enjoyable, and they're such a blast, and there's such a great reward for the work you've done to get there. In Breath of the Wild, the divine beasts never feel like that great of a reward. They don't really culminate in something exceptional. They're fun, they're okay, they have some interesting quirks, but they don't challenge you and make you feel the way that a typical temple does. So I think beyond anything else, the divine beasts or the temples in this game were some of the weakest I think that I've played. And in the end, that was a very difficult thing for me to get past and get over when I was, kind of collecting my thoughts on how I felt about Breath of the Wild. In the end, I just had some qualms with the details of Breath of the Wild. I will say that it is such an ambitious game that it's hard to knock it for such minute details. But they were bothersome, and eventually wear the game a bit thin near the end. But my complaints are not indicative about how much I enjoyed Breath of the Wild. It's actually quite good. I think I tend to be more critical of games that review really well, especially when they come from such a storied series. But I thought it was fair to point out some of the flaws that I thought were significant in detracting from the overall experience. Don't get me wrong, though. Breath of the Wild is pretty great. There are plenty of elements I really enjoyed. The combat scenarios are dynamic and engaging. The world is lively and brimming with activity, and there's just so much to do. It's not a stretch to say that you could dump hundreds of hours into Zelda. For me, it got old before I got to that point. But there is tons here for completionists. And I'd have to say what Nintendo has done with Breath of the Wild is they've made one of the more exceptional examples of a game I think that nearly anybody could pick up and enjoy. The difficulty curve, especially early on, may seem too significant for people, and there's a lot of people who might not enjoy the amount of time you have to spend in the menus, the amount of resource management you have to do, but I think they've made like a really exceptional Zelda game for all people. I think this is maybe a bad introduction to what the series is, but it would be a really fun game for most people to pick up and play. It's very different. It's a change of style, and I think more than anything for me, the biggest problem I had with it was that it just didn't have that same attention to detail that I expect out of the Zelda series. Just the amount of enjoyment and the feeling that so much time went into every element of it. Parts of the open world feel a little bit empty, and I just can't get over how disappointed I was by the shrines and the divine beasts. But beyond that, I mean, this is a good game, and it's one of the best games I've played this year, albeit I haven't finished many games this year. So overall, is it a 10 out of 10? Maybe for you, was it a 10 out of 10 for me? I don't know, because I don't do fucking number reviews, because they're a waste of goddamn time. And I'm taking my stand and putting my fucking foot down right now, right here. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. This is a meaningless endeavor anyways. So Zelda, don't buy a Switch for it, but, you know, it's probably fine on the Wii U. Hooray, 2017, 2 reviews down. I'm so far behind. Like and subscribe, whatever. You got anything? You got anything?
Baasvik, more like Cuxvik.
Fuck you.
Baasvik, basic reviews. Baasvik, basic reviews. Baasvik, basic reviews. Video games. He's not gonna cry. He's not gonna bitch or whine. He's Baasvik, and he's gonna review